Welcome to another episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. I am your host, Graham Hall, joined today by a very special guest who I know is very familiar to everyone out there who has listened to the pod, followed us at Swamp247, wherever you found our content. I'm joined by Jacob Rudner, who no longer is with us at Swamp247, as he is now at Baseball America, absolutely crushing it, looking forward to the 2025 season. But he was kind enough today to join us to preview Florida baseball's upcoming 2025 season, which opens February 14th with a weekend series against Air Force. First time the Gators have played Air Force in a 3-game series. It's right around the corner. I know we're in the midst of transfer portal, early signing day, Florida basketball being on the heels of potentially being a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. But we also got to talk about baseball here at Swamp 247, and who better to talk it all over with than Jacob Rudner. Mr. Rudner, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. It's good to be back.
Yeah, we're going to try and have Jacob on a couple times this season. He's a busy man, of course. He's going to be traveling around covering games. But he'll be at few Florida baseball games, right? Isn't that your plan?
Yeah, no, I will be there. Still living out here in the swamp. So, yeah, I'll be there.
Excellent. Well, we're going to jump right into it. We got a good bit to talk about today. It's an exciting season that it looks like for Florida baseball. Obviously, you got to see how it all plays out here. But a lot of critical returnees for Florida on the mound. Obviously have to replace Jack Caglione, which is, almost an impossible feat, just how accomplished he was at Florida, maybe a by-committee approach. But we're going to jump just right in. And we'll start with who Florida was able to bring back from their roster from last season. When you look at the guys that they were able to get back in this team, some guys who maybe had some decisions to make here and come back and can play some critical roles, as well as some guys returning from injury. Just how critical do you think the returnees are going to be to Florida having a little bit more success this season? Florida was able to make it to Omaha, but the regular season last year didn't necessarily go according to plan. Florida certainly took their lumps. The pitching left a little bit to be desired. I guess maybe that's even an understatement, in my opinion, at least. We'll get your take. Just how critical do you think the returnees are going to be to Florida's success this season?
Yeah, I will. Let's kind of break it down by spot here, because I think it's important in a couple different areas. I think on the mound, it really is a big deal for Florida. Last year, things didn't look great, although my evaluation of Florida's issues on the mound last year, largely, and this isn't applicable in every case, but for the most part, I think you could chalk up to inexperience. Liam Peterson was a true freshman thrust into a huge role. Luke McNeely, kind of the same. Jake Clemente was coming off of a major arm injury. Pierce Coppola hadn't really thrown over the course of 2 years, and last year started to kind of come back. And there were more. Frank Menendez, in a critical left-handed role, had to come into games, in spots. And so Florida brought back a lot of that depth this year, which I think is really encouraging. I've been out to a couple practices. I know that the Swamp 247 message board, followed along for the fall when I was still working with the site. And one thing that I noticed across the board with the pitchers was that there were a lot of mechanical adjustments that encouraged me. And I think that Liam Peterson is a great example of that. Last year, Peterson, I thought, had really good stuff. You could tell that there was a lot of promise. I think we saw him work out in the fall and look good, really good, like somebody who could potentially play his way into the early rounds of the draft in 2026. And then he gets into the season and he starts things out and things don't look great. There was a quick stretch of, I think, about 5 starts where he had a sub 2.3 ERA. And in the postseason, solid. And then in Omaha, struggles a lot. And many of those struggles for Peterson were due to control. And so one thing that happened with him over the offseason was that he and Florida and some of the coaches with Team USA, Christopher Ostrander, the head coach at Southern Mississippi, was also one of those people, looked at Peterson and basically said, you have the stuff to be very successful, but you need to simplify and you need to make sure that your motion and the things that you do are moving in the direction that you want the baseball to go. And that's toward the plate and hitting your spots. And so they've eliminated a lot of the east to west movement in his mechanics. They've simplified things for him, and they've made it really about the stuff so they can allow the pitches to play and try and take out some of that unnecessary movement that lets things get out of control. And that was really important. And I think that can be said about a couple other guys too. Frank Menendez is A, healthier, but B, has simplified his mechanics a little bit. Luke McNeely we've seen throw a couple times, and I've been reasonably impressed this fall. I don't know that he's made a ton of changes, but maturity is really helpful for a guy like him. So on the mound, I think that Florida's returning depth is critical because you have a bunch of guys who are in a position now to improve based on experience and based on some of these changes that Florida and even people outside of Florida have been able to make. At the plate, I think it's a little bit different because we did see a lot of these guys have success last year. Colby Shelton, I think, would tell you that he didn't have his best season. He was a freshman All-American last year, struggled with the strikeout a little bit more. We still saw the power at times, but I don't think he was as consistent as a hitter as he wanted to be, nor as he was expected to be. I believe he'll take a step forward this season. Luke Heyman, I viewed him as somebody who got unlucky quite a bit last season. He's homered now in every single preseason practice so far, so he's looked really good. Cade Curlin, and I've talked about this even on the podcast, played the entire season last year with a broken hand. So I look around Florida's roster and I see a whole bunch of returners who are talented, who maybe last year didn't consistently have their best stuff if you're a pitcher, or guys who maybe were, reaching a little bit at the plate and trying to do too much, trying to fill in their role outside of that Jack Caglione spot in the lineup. And all these guys come back in a year older, more experienced, some of them with changes to how they go about and do things. And I believe that will really bode well for Florida and kind of gives them a nice foundation to build off of.
Hayden Yost being healthy seems to be big news for Florida. How do you factor him into this rotation here? What do you think he's going to end up doing in terms of a role this year for Florida?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's a big deal in the sense that more depth is always a good thing. The more players teams have available to them is positive. I think that one thing, and this is good, that Florida did really well over the offseason was bolster its roster so that guys like Yost, who are coming off of major injuries, he tore his ACL last year before Florida series at Georgia, maybe don't have to be in super critical starting roles, at least right out the gate. I don't view Hayden Yost as a day one starter in the outfield. I think that Florida has three guys in Blake Sear, who I'm sure we'll talk about, Kyle Jones, and Ty Evans as their starters from left to right. I think that those are the three guys, in my opinion, who are clearly the top three. But, Hayden Yost starts at most schools in the SEC. He's a plus defender. He's got a good arm. Last year, we saw him succeed in right. I think his bat is solid, especially when it comes to, just putting the bat on the ball. The field to hit is solid. So listen, do I think he's going to start this year? Maybe sporadically. And I think if somebody were to get hurt in the starting lineup, he certainly would be one of the first guys off the bench to step in. But he does give Florida a really critical and solid bench bat who does have some experience from last year and knows how Florida does things and knows how Sully likes to do things. And that really matters for a team. And so it's just a great thing to have back.
Yeah, obviously injuries are going to happen here, and you got to have depth pieces. And this is certainly just seems to be a boost to a Florida team that already is considered to be very, very deep right now. And there's an argument to be made that when it comes to freshman impacts, that baseball is going to get more out of them than maybe any other sport. Just who are some of the freshmen that Florida fans should have on their radar, who you think could make maybe not even an instant impact, but by the end of the season here, or even by SEC play, you could see emerging into the lineup?
Yeah, there are three or four who I think are really important to Florida this year, and potentially, a second tier beyond those 3 to 4 who have the potential to contribute as well. I'll focus on those 3 to 4 just for the sake of this conversation. And the first to me is Brendan Lawson, Canadian left-handed swinger. He's an infielder. I think over time, Florida fans will see him play third base or even shortstop, more likely third base in my opinion. But this season first, which is a really nice fit just because first base is a good spot for a young player. It puts less defensive pressure on him, and I think it allows you to kind of let the bat play a little bit more. We could also see him take some DH reps. But he is a very talented hitter, and the ball kind of sounds different when it comes off his bat. Powerful swinger, nice feel to hit. I thought he had the potential to just bypass college altogether and go straight to the pros. I had heard from sources over the offseason that he had 7-figure offers in the draft, but turned those down to be able to go to school. So this is a really talented guy who Florida did a great job in the recruiting process to be able to land, but also a really nice job to be able to continue to convince him that college was the right route and that whatever offers he was experiencing in this year's draft, which to my knowledge were probably second round-ish, and you can inflate that or deflate that a little bit either way. I think that he could potentially be a first-round pick in a couple of years from now, and Florida really saw that in him. And the pitch was kind of come to school, and let's see if we can make that happen. So that was a big win. Aiden King out of Jacksonville, right-handed pitcher, is a guy who I'm really bullish on. He's got real 4 pitches. He's got a good splitter, which has nicely worked out for Florida over the last couple of years. That pitch in particular, Hurston Waldrop, is a guy that I think a lot of Florida fans would be familiar with who use that pitch quite frequently. King has got a good one. He's 90 to 94. I've seen him up to 95. Good stuff. But the biggest thing with him, he's very reminiscent of the Brandon Neely, bulldog, go get him type attitude, very no nonsense. I had one person tell me that when people are laughing in the locker room, this guy's got a straight face. And so Sully really likes that quality. Brady Singer's another guy who comes to mind who really succeeded with that in Gainesville. And so I think Aiden King kind of fits that mold. And we've seen those guys have a lot of success under Sully when they bring that to the table. So he'll be critical, whether that's in a late bullpen, midweek starter role. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that that's kind of the ballpark of where we'll see him contribute this year. And then there's 2 lefties in the bullpen who I think are going to be important. And those are Nico Janssens, and McCall Bymiller. Both these guys were underrated as recruits. Janssens was a 2-way player, played first base and is a left-handed pitcher. Florida's going to have him just pitch this season. They made some huge changes in the fall to how he pitches. Initially came in kind of thrown over the top, which is up here. And then they broadened him out to be more of a sidearm look. After seeing him throw from first to second base, they thought that it was a more natural arm slot for him, moved him down, and then he started to experience a lot of success. More of a 2-pitch pitcher, good slider, good fastball. He'll contribute. And then McCall Bymiller is somebody who I think is really intriguing. Great curveball, good fastball. He's got a changeup in there, throws a solid slider. He's got some work to do from a control standpoint. There's a little bit more polish that needs to go onto the canvas here. However, I do see a lot of potential, and I think that he'll be able to contribute immediately, especially seeing as though Florida doesn't have a ton of depth at that left-handed reliever spot.
Yeah, I think this is a team that certainly, when you look at the pitching last year, just left a good bit to be desired. And I was wondering from following their transfer portal moves, the transfer portal has become so prolific, especially in football and basketball. But this is maybe just my opinion here, but it seems like there was a little bit of a slower embrace when it comes to college baseball. But you've seen recent impact guys who have been brought into the SEC and from the jump have just been able to make instant impacts, even coming from, group of 5 type schools who were, smaller programs where they came in here. For Florida, when you look at those transfers, I know you mentioned Sear coming in here from Miami. When you look at some of the guys that Florida has added, who do you think early on could be one of those name to know type guys that has joined Florida's team now?
Yeah, I mean, if you just go around the diamond, there's a couple guys who are definitely going to start, at least positionally. That's Bobby Bozer from South Florida. He'll start at third base. Sear, who you just mentioned from Miami, will start in left. Kyle Jones, who is arguably my favorite transfer in the Swamp247 message board, is certainly familiar with my take on Kyle Jones. Is going to start in center, elite speed. I think he's going to be a major contributor this year. Also is going to hit leadoff for Florida. So those are the 3 guys in the lineup who I think are going to contribute immediately. You can also throw Justin Doe from Jacksonville. He's going to come off the bench, and Landon Stripling from Texas Tech, another guy who I think is going to be able to get some at-bats in valuable situations this season. Where Florida didn't really do a whole bunch in the portal was on the mound. I think that they leaned a little bit more on the returning depth, and that was an area where I thought they could have benefited from somebody in the portal. But at the same time, like we just kind of talked about, the maturity of some of the guys who are back in the fold now, I think will be beneficial to them. So, if you're looking for transfer contributors, most of that will come at the plate. But Billy Barlow from Clemson is somebody who is going to be able to contribute. And Florida also brought in Matthew Jenkins, a junior college transfer from Santa Fe, who to me is one of the more intriguing guys on this roster. He's got a real 3-pitch mix, good fastball, I think potentially plus slider, good changeup. Lacked a little bit of control as a first-year player at Santa Fe, but came in the fall and I thought was pretty impressive. So, somebody who I think can contribute in the back of the bullpen at a minimum, and looked good. So, I think Florida did well in the portal this offseason. Were there areas where maybe they could have added a couple more players on the mound, especially in the bullpen? Yeah, I think so. But it's a good class. And, especially in the field where you got guys like Bozer who can play multiple positions. Nadeau, if his shoulder's healthy, can play multiple positions and he makes good contact as well. As I said, I think Kyle Jones is a real potential first round look type player. Not this year, he's not draft eligible, but next season, just with his speed, plus defender and center, which is a premier position, and he makes good contact. And I think, if he adds 15 pounds to his frame over the next year, is a guy who might run into a little bit more power. And then you're talking about a guy who's a very complete, solid bat to ball, great defender, plus speed in the bases type guy. And you're talking about a first round profile right there.
Florida baseball had some news a couple of days ago when you saw that Michael Byrne is going to return for the 2025 season in the dugout for Florida as he continues to rehab a late season injury from last year. He was, for Florida fans who remember this, drafted in the 14th round by the Cincinnati Reds after what an incredible run at Florida from 2016 to 2018. Obviously was there as a sophomore for Florida's national championship. But when you look at that closing role, who sticks out to you in your mind right now as someone who could step in and give Florida a little more assurance there on the mound in the late innings?
Yeah, I not to toot my own horn here, but I think Florida fans will remember about this time last year, I was telling them that Philpott, as a true freshman, looked to me like somebody who could really be a factor at the back end of Florida's bullpen in short order with a big high spin fastball. It's the kind of fastball that profiles as, really plus. From a pro perspective, it has all the right characteristics, a lot of ride up in the zone, gets on hitters quickly. And now this year, that role belongs to him. I mean, he's going to get the first crack at closing out games for the Gators this season. He's up to 97. Florida has added a rocker step to his delivery. So basically that means he steps back, behind him towards the first base side. He's a right-handed pitcher before delivering to the plate. And for whatever reason, that has changed the game for him. It has allowed him to kind of be a little bit more fluid in his mechanics. It allows him to get to the plate in a cleaner way. Some guys that complicates things. We talked about Liam Peterson at the top of the show and how, eliminating some of that east-west movement has been a real benefit to him. Philpott has been the exact opposite. Florida added a little bit more of that east-west motion, and it's just kind of allowed it to tie the whole mechanical process together, and that's been really good for him. He's a guy who I could see being an All-American caliber closer. I don't know about this year, but certainly in a year from now, if that's the area that he sticks, and is a guy who, if that happens, could, have a really fast-tracked pro process. He needs to clean up the control. Sometimes the misses are bad and can get him into trouble, whether that's with walks or just kind of running into bad contact because he kind of supplies the power with his fastball. But I do see a lot of the characteristics of somebody who could be very successful in the back end of a bullpen in the SEC.
You've mentioned a lot of mechanical changes so far on this podcast, and just wanted to dive a little bit more into Liam Peterson's there and how much you think it can help him. And for those who out here are, big fans of the specifics here, what kind of tinkering have you heard that Florida really focused on doing for him from last season?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of already got into it. It's a lot of just elimination of motion. Florida had a very raw pitcher in Liam last year. And one of the big problems was that when he was rocking himself east-west, he wasn't getting back to the same release point. It wasn't consistent. And it caused him to miss spots a lot. And Florida fans remember surely there were a lot of walks in his makeup last year. I think that was kind of the focus mechanically this offseason, and they knew that they needed to simplify. And that's what they did. So they made sure that a lot of the motion was just toward the plate. I will say that Christopher Ostrander, the Southern Miss head coach, who I mentioned, at the top of the show, deserves a ton of credit for kind of fixing Liam Peterson. He did a ton of work with the collegiate national team in Cary, North Carolina. Really did a good job of just kind of watching Peterson and saying, okay, here are the things that we need to fix. He has a great reputation, of pitcher management and development. He was also the guy who put Hurston Waldrop on the map before Florida got him. So this is a guy with a lot of experience, and I think that helped Peterson a lot. The other thing that's worth mentioning, though, and this is not mechanical, is the mental side of things. Liam will be the first person to tell you he kind of got in his own way a lot last year. Things would spiral for him mentally when they weren't going well. And so that was a major focus for them this offseason. Florida works with, as do most teams, a sports psychiatrist, somebody who's able to kind of get into the mind of athletes and help them to compartmentalize portions of the game and how to deal with success and failure and kind of remaining, even keeled. And again, it's worth mentioning this is very common, but for some guys that ends up being a lot more impactful than for others. And I think for Liam, the work in that department this offseason has been huge. And he would tell you in the same way I am now that could be the biggest difference. If they didn't make a single physical change and he came into the season a little bit better prepared mentally than he was as a true freshman, that could be, the difference that he needs to be a successful Friday night guy as a sophomore. And Florida certainly is invested in making those changes as well.
All right, I got to be honest. I feel like I've danced around it a little bit because some people would talk about Florida baseball and say that this is one of the most pressing questions for this team. But with how potent they were offensively last year, having him on the mound on Sundays too, and just his impact on the overall team, how does this team go about replacing Jack Caglione? Can you even replace a guy like that? And how do they make up what he was able to provide, at the plate for this team here? How are they going to be able to do that this season in your mind and ensure that there's not a drop off in how potent they were offensively last season?
Yeah, it's very simple. You don't replace Jack Caglione. That's in my opinion, the best player to ever wear orange and blue. And there have been a lot of great ones, but measured purely by, volume of contribution, nobody did what Jack was able to do for this team. And you don't replace that. There is not a single guy on Florida's roster this season, frankly, who will match the production at the plate in terms of being able to lead the team in every major offensive category for the most part. There's nobody on this team who will match his production in terms of home runs. And there's obviously nobody who's going to be able to do all of what I just said while being a contributor in the rotation every weekend. So in short, they can't. However, I do think that Florida built its roster in a way to be able to kind of make up for the loss. So not replacing, but changing the style in a way that it allows you to account for the fact that Jack is no longer a part of the picture. I think this is a group that's going to make a lot more contact at the plate. We're going to see a lot more getting on base out of this squad than we saw last year. And that's the kind of thing that allows you to make up for the total bases that Jack was able to produce with his bat. Florida will get more guys on. There's going to be more opportunities to go station to station. I think importantly, Florida's added a little bit more speed on the bases, so you don't necessarily need to rely on the guy batting, third to move everybody around and kind of make things happen. Guys will be able to make things happen on their own. Jones, who I've talked about, plenty already on this podcast, is a guy who's going to be able to generate his own offense. Nadeau is another person who can do that. We've seen Curlin move a little bit on the bases. Sear can do the same. Evans can do the same. And so that's going to be really important at the plate. On the mound, listen, I think Jack was valuable for Florida on the mound because of his consistency. He never missed a start as a Gator. He was always out there every single Sunday as a sophomore and again as a junior. And that was after having Tommy John surgery. So that was certainly impressive. But there were a lot of weekends when Jack was on the mound where I think there was something left to be desired. And that was from a control standpoint, from a longevity standpoint, in terms of getting deeper into starts. And I do think that Florida will have a little bit more success this season on the mound with its rotation in terms of just getting that consistency. And that's because I think Florida has guys who are just able to focus on pitching now. And so that will be a benefit. But again, at the end of the day, there is no replacing Jack Caglione and just the magnitude of what he brought to this team. It's going to have to be done. It's a group effort to be able to do that on both sides. And I do think that Florida has the pieces to do it. But again, I'll reiterate it. It's going to have to look different in order for that to be able to be accomplished.
Yeah, it's funny. You talk to people around the program, and I know you certainly have, and you do a great job covering now a ton of teams, probably countless teams. I know you've probably lost track of all the teams you followed and talked to and written previews of. And I know that everyone out there who's, of course, interested in more of Jacob's coverage, follow him. You always know how to follow him on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. But read him at Baseball America. He does a fantastic job putting together their magazine and doing all their national coverage along with a great team that they have. So make sure you check him out over there. But as you talk to people around the program and you talk to people who follow the sport, it kind of is funny that you lose a guy who's arguably the most impactful player that has ever come through, now Gary Condren Ballpark. and expectations get a little bit higher, it seems, for Florida. Those who have talked to Kevin O'Sullivan think that this could be the closest that they've had since the 2017 team here, but there were high expectations last year. What's the key in your mind to not just reaching those expectations, but making sure that you are a little bit more consistent and get off to a better start here in the regular season, which wasn't something, like we said, that Florida was able to do last year? In your mind, what are the key factors that Florida is going to have to achieve for them to, be better than a 28, 29 win team in the regular season this year?
Yeah, you'll have to excuse me. There's a leaf blower going on outside right now, which is quite loud. But listen, I think for Florida this season, it all comes down to the mound. Last year, one of the biggest issues that this team ran into rather consistently was that it didn't get good enough pitching at times, whether that was starters not getting deep enough into games, whether that was bullpen guys coming in at certain spots and not being able to get the job done. Look, here's the number that matters. Florida finished last, 14-14 in the SEC in team ERA. It can't happen. It can't happen. And yet they still reached Omaha because everything clicked at the right time. And Florida kind of turned back into the Gators that everybody knows when the tournament started. So you can't really complain. But at the end of the day, for Florida to be consistently successful before that time, and so they don't have to sweat out Selection Sunday when it comes time to figure out whether or not they're going to get into the tournament, you have to pitch better. They can't be even a bottom half team in the SEC. We ranked them 7th in our preseason poll. And the reason for that was because we do believe that Florida will be more consistent on the mound. We don't really have any doubts about whether or not they're going to be able to hit, because there are a lot of guys in this lineup who we view as potent and productive. But again, it will come down to whether or not the guys who were in certain roles last year will be able to adequately take the step up into their roles this year. So Liam Peterson, for example, was kind of all over the place. I mean, he started out the year as a starter. We saw him come out of the bullpen a little bit, moved around the days of the week that he started pitching because things weren't going well at times. This year, Friday night, he's your ace. You got to pitch like an ace. That's a big role. Jake Clemente was a reliever last year and then started to make some starting appearances in the postseason and did a good job. Now he's your Saturday starter. It's a big role. It's a big jump. Pierce Capalla. I mean, I think he's as talented as anybody. And I think if you talk to, scouts, which, I've done plenty of over the last 2 years, they'll tell you that guy is as talented and as promising looking on paper as it gets in the country. However, and this is a big if, can he stay healthy? We haven't seen that, yet so far in his college career. He's got the stuff. Will he have the control? Will he be able to consistently make starts and give Florida 5-6 innings on a weekly basis? We don't know. Alex Philpott, he's now the closer of this team. Last year was a middle reliever. So the list goes on. There are a lot of guys who I think are talented, who have stuff, but there are question marks as to whether or not they're ready for the big step up in the role that they have. And until those questions are answered, it's tough to really say what Florida's going to be. But to answer your question, success will be quite dependent upon those guys, acclimating to their new areas successfully and quickly.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be an exciting time to watch this Florida team. It all starts in 2 weeks here. And Jacob, obviously want to thank you because we have a great baseball community over at Swamp247, and you are a massive reason why that is the case right now. And so we thank you. I know everyone's looking forward to hear you and hear your great takes on this team. And I really appreciate you joining me for 30 minutes to break down this Florida team. Really looking forward to getting out there and seeing it. I know you are too, as well as seeing a ton of other teams. Again, everyone out there, read Jacob at Baseball America. Follow him on Twitter for nonstop baseball coverage. I know he is looking forward to the season, hoping he gets a little bit of rest for the next 2 weeks before everything gets underway here. And it is a busy 5 months. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. Again, really appreciate Jacob joining me. And we'll see you next time.